In this video, we're going to learn a little bit about store procedures, and we're going to write them in Oracle Apex or using Oracle Apex as our tool. Now, we're going to start out by creating a table and putting a couple of test records in our table. So feel free to either follow along with me and create the test table and put some records in it, or if you like, you could use one that you already have. But I'm going to build a test table right now. It's just going to take me a couple seconds or so. So let me just quickly go and create a script. So what I'm going to do is just create a simple table just with a couple columns in it with a variety of different columns. We're going to do, well, how about this? We're just going to do a number and a variable character. And then we're just going to insert a couple records into our table. So what we're going to do is after we build our table, we're going to create several different store procedures. The first store procedures we're going to write aren't going to use really a lot of table structure or table commands. And then we're going to, write store procedures that are going to return records from our table. So the table that we're writing here is going to be non-remarkable. So let me just quickly issue the commands drop table, raw customers. Remember, RAH are my initials. You can ignore them if you like. If you see them out there, that just means that they're mine. And I'm just going to put a couple of records out here or a couple of columns out here. Now, I'm going to intentionally kind of introduce a couple of errors in here because I want you to see some common error messages that you're going to be encountering while you're writing and running your store procedures. So I'm going to, by default, or I'm going to on purpose or intentionally leave a couple of columns out of this table, and I want you to see the error messages we're going to get. But basically, we're just going to put a few columns in here. Like I have the first name, the last name, and their variable character. I'm also going to put in a zip code, which I'm going to make as a number. So a simple table. Notice there's no constraints on it. That's really not a coincidence. I'm just trying to keep things pretty simple. So there's no primary keys. There's no foreign keys. No check constraints. Just a simple table. Again, easy peasy, nice and easy. So let's put a couple of records into my table. Again, I'm just going to put a couple in here. And if you have a table that you're already working with or a table that you want to use for your store procedure exercises, certainly you can. But like I mentioned here, I'm just going to put in a couple of records. So let me put in my name, Bob Hendry, put in my zip code 60613. And let's see, let me put in one more. So we got the one record for Bob Hendry. And the second record we're going to put in, and we're going to put in Cadence Hendry. And she lives with me, so we'll keep her with the same zip code, 60613. Now that's really it. We're going to add another column in a little bit because we're going to write a store procedure that's going to refer to one that doesn't exist. But never mind that for now. I digress. So let's name the script, SC for script, create customer data, and let me run the script. So hopefully we'll run okay. We'll find out really soon now. Click on run now. And we should get the following. Table dropped, table created, one row inserted, one row inserted. So everything looks like it's good. So we have our test table. See, it only took about 4 minutes. And we have 2 records that are in there. So now that we got our test table, let's move on to the next step. Let's talk about building a store procedure. Now, a store procedure is really just executable code that exists in the database that we could call. It's very similar to a trigger, except triggers get fired upon system events, such as inserting and deleting into a table or logging in. Store procedures have to be called. They're kind of like functions. I don't want to say they are database functions because a database function is really something completely different, but it's an executable part of code. So let's create a simple procedure. So the syntax in Oracle for creating a store procedure is create or replace procedure. Now, I'm not going to get into, altering procedures or dropping ones that are already there. There are some other syntaxes that you can use for that. We're just going to stay really simple here with create or replace procedure. So we got create or replace procedure, SP get name. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put in a couple of parameters that we're going to be passing into the procedure. Now, when we put in parameters, or we supply the parameters, or what's called the signature for the procedure, we specify a couple things. Well, actually 3 things. The first thing we specify is the name of the parameter. Here we got AID, for A stands for argument. N, which means that we're inputting it in, or we're passing it into the procedure, and it is a number. Now we have a comma because that denotes that we have the second parameter, which we have as a name. It's an output parameter, which means it's going to be coming out of the store procedure, and it's a variable character, or varchar 2. Notice we don't have to specify the size of it, just the data type. So we have number and we have varchar 2. And again, the first parameter, AID, is an input parameter, means we're passing it in, and a name is output, which means that it's going to be passed back. Now, it's important to point out that procedures don't return values, but that's kind of a misnomer because I just said that they do as part of the signature. A little more about that in an upcoming video. So after we supply, or we specify the signature of the procedure, which we did on line 1 and 2, then what we do is we put in any variable, and we start the procedure with the as. You can also use is, or as I have here, as. So on line 4, I'm declaring a variable. It's a local variable, just because that's the scope of variables in store procedures, and I'm calling it V first name. V stands for variable, and it's a variable character to 50 characters long, or up to. Now, let me catch up here. On line 6 and 7, what I'm doing is I'm writing a SQL statement that's going to return to me the name of a customer based on the ID that we're going to pass in. Now, we just built this table. So we're going to build in a SQL statement that select the first name into V first name, which is the variable, from RAH customers, which is the table that we just already wrote. And we're going to put in where customer ID equals what we're passing in. So basically, the store procedure is going to return to us the first name of a customer keyed on the ID. So we'll pass in 1, it's going to pass us the first name for customer 1. If we pass in 2, it's going to give us the first name for customer 2, and so on and so forth. So we're done issuing the SQL statement. Then on line 11, we just specify the return value, the output value, which we have here on line 2 is a name. And I'm going kind of quick here, so if you need to, I encourage you to stop the video if you want to from time to time, just to kind of catch up and get a compile if you like. Basically, what I'm doing here is, even though I'm a little wordy, is I'm giving you the condensed form of this. I'm not giving you a lot of fluff. I'm just giving you the examples. So I fully expect you to stop and start again. That's probably a good strategy. So anyway, let me save this script, name it as SP get first name, and do a create. Now, I intentionally have an error in here. Some of you might have caught it, where I don't have the customer ID column. If you look at line 9, the table that I created is first name and last name and zip. There's nothing about customer ID. So we're going to have to fix this, but what I want you to see is I want you to see the error message that I get. Because in this store procedure, I'm referring to a column in RH customers that doesn't exist. We don't have the customer ID column. It's not there. So we should not get a clean compile of this store procedure. And that's what we're doing now. We're not running this store procedure. We're creating it. So we need to get a clean compile. But we shouldn't get one because, like I mentioned, we have a scenario here where we're referring to a column in line 9 that doesn't exist in the table. Now, that's important to point out that when you try to compile a store procedure, it will do that checking for you. So it won't blindly just compile it for you. But if you see this, we got an error message. It doesn't really say much about it, but it kind of gives you the number of the line. Now, as you get better at this, and as you see more of these error messages, you're going to start being better detectives when it comes to debugging this stuff. But the problem here, even though the error message isn't really descriptive, is we have a problem with the name, or pardon me, with a column. So I'm going to fix this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the table, and I'm going to put in the customer ID column that you see here on line 9. So I intentionally did that just to kind of show you that when we try to compile a store procedure where we refer to a column that doesn't exist, we're going to have to either fix it here, or we're going to have to, in our case, we're just going to pretend like we're just going to, it was there all along, I suppose, and fix it in the table itself. So let's do that. Let's kind of rewind, go back a few minutes, and let's change the table and say, okay, well, let's just put it back in here, and we're going to put in the customer, the customer number. I think that's what it was. I have to take a look and specify it. So if I put in like emp ID, that would not work. Remember, it's got to match. It doesn't do, specifically, by order as in some signatures do, where you have to specify the order. So in our case here, what we're going to have to do is, it's going to show you again how this is going to work. If I create this table, it's going to create okay with emp ID in there, but I'm still going to have the issue with this. So let me go and change it now. Again, I'm kind of beating this into the ground, but I don't want to underestimate or estimize, if that's a word, this, because all of you are going to run into this sooner or later. So there, we got customer ID, and make sure that the underscore is right where it needs to be. And remember, this is case insensitive. It could be lowercase, it could be uppercase, it really doesn't matter. So let's give this a shot. So let's recreate our table with our test data. We got our 2 test records. We have Bob Hendry and we have Cadence Hendry, and we both have the same zip code. So I should get the following feedback: table drop, table created, looks all good. Easy peasy. So now, how about we do this? Let's go back to our script that creates our store procedure, and let's take a look at this. And we got customer ID. Oh, wait a second. We don't got an underscore there, right? So I'll give you an extra credit bonus point. Will this work or not? They have to actually match. So you can take a quick look at it, make sure they match, and they don't. Notice one has an underscore, the other one does not. So we're just going to have to make sure that they match. In this case, what we'll do is we'll just get rid of the underscore in the table. And again, I'm overemphasizing this, I know, but believe me, the 10 minutes or the 5 minutes I've spent kind of beating this into the ground will save you a lot of time. Okay, because now you have it in your head. They got to match, not just the columns and the number of columns and the order of columns, but the names of them have to match perfectly as well. And remember, they don't have to be the same case. So let's change this. Let's take a look. Customer ID. Let's do a quick run just to see this again. We're going to do a run now. And we see procedure created. Okay, so we match. So we're good. So we have the procedure. So what does this procedure do again? Let's review. We're passing in a number, and that procedure is running a SQL statement, passing that number to a SQL where statement. That SQL where statement is going to bring back one record, which is the first name, based on that ID, right? So it's just a simple SQL statement. Now, do store procedures have to run SQL statements? No, they don't. We're just kind of skipping the easy one, because we could build store procedures that add 2 numbers and return a third. We could do anything we want. In our case, we're kind of skipping that and going right into the intermediate store procedures, where we're mixing SQL statements, or what are called embedded SQL statements, into the store procedure itself. So anyway, from this point, what we can do is we can actually run our store procedure. Now, there's a variety of ways that we could do this. If we wanted to, what we can do is we could just run this from the SQL command line. Is you could just go to the command line and you can execute your store procedure, or what you can do is you can just build a script to do so. So what we're going to do here for the sake of argument is we're going to build a script, and we're just going to execute that script that's going to execute that store procedure. Now, this is how it's done in real life. Your store procedure is called by something else, right? I mean, think about it. All of you here, or all of you that are watching this, have some experience with writing or using or architecting other third or fourth generation computer languages. So you get it. You build functions, you call the function from a piece of code, the function does something. That's what you're going for. So in this case, I'm going to put in a anonymous block, or basically an anonymous PL SQL program, where I'm going to declare, and again, this isn't a store procedure, this is just the database script, where I'm going to declare two variables, the name and the ID. You can set the ID equal to 1. Now watch this. I'm going to call spGetName. Why am I calling it here? Well, why not? I have to illustrate us calling this from somewhere, but we can call it from other places as well. I mean, we can call this store procedure spGetName from other store procedures, from triggers. We could call it really anywhere we like to. So notice for spGetName, we're passing it two parameters of the data types, number and variable character. Now remember, number is going to look for that first name based on that number. Like 1 will return Bob, right? For Bob Hendry. 2 will return Cadence for Cadence Hendry. So on line 7, I'm just going to write out to the command line, dbms output, put line, found name, vname, whatever. So this should be about it insofar as getting us to run. So let's do n semicolon, and let's do a quick create. So we probably should, and I'm going to do that now, is I'm going to save this script, because we're going to need to save it to run it anyway. But let me kind of pause here to give you guys like a good look at what we're doing here. Basically what we have here is, again, is we have a kind of an anonymous piece of PL SQL code that's just running our store procedure just to run it, just to test it. So anyway, we did compile our store procedure on line 6, spGetName. It's compiled, it's ready to run. So let's do that here. Let me just quickly create this script and let me run it. Now, if I do a run now, take a look at this. Now, I put a couple of errors in here as well. Well, at least one. Sometimes I try to put one in, but I kind of have more than one. If you see this error message here, the symbol semicolon was substituted, that just means that it found the end of our program without it having, absence of syntax error. So the error here was I just needed to put a semicolon on line 7. Let me execute this real quick, and I should get statement processed. Now, what happened is I actually ran that block of code, but we don't see the output, right? So where did it go? First of all, let's check to make sure statements processed are successful. And then if you want to see the output, that DBMS output line, change your view from summary to detail. So if you click on detail and click on go, it won't run it again. But what will happen is you will see any output, like DBMS output put line, and you see it right there. See, we see the found name equal Bob. Now that was me. That was the code that I put in my PL SQL block that called my store procedure. So we worked, right? We compiled the store procedure, we called it, and it found the name Bob. So you have just written your first store procedure. Well, at least for this video you have. So basically, that is those are the steps to create a store procedure. Well, in our case, we kind of did an extra step by creating a table, which we really didn't really need to do, but we did it because, why not? And then after we built our table, we created a store procedure that takes an input argument of the ID, and then it outputs the first name. And then we called it from a PL SQL block. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to get a little bit more complicated and write some some slightly more complex store procedures. Store procedures that return, maybe more than one record, and also store procedures that might have varying different SQL statements in them. So this was like store procedure number 1 that we wrote, and we're going to create some other ones as well. Now, a couple things about design characteristics or design considerations of building store procedures. Basically, what you would do is if you had common functionality that you wanted to put in, in one place, you would use a store procedure to do that. Store procedures are ways to organize your code. It's also a way to kind of encapsulate, what is actually happening behind the scenes. Like, for example, if you didn't want database developers to do the same things over and over again, what you would do is you would write a store procedure and just give it to them. I mean, sometimes, like if you're a database developer, your end customers are other database developers. So you would be supporting them just writing store procedures. So let's change our store procedure here. So rather than taking in a customer ID, let's put in a zip code. Let me show you another kind of bugaboo here. What we're going to do, as far as the big picture goes, is we're going to have a store procedure take a zip code, and we're going to retrieve everyone for that zip code. But the problem is follows. If we have more than one record that's going to be returned, like in our design here, we are going to have a problem because right now we're using what are called singleton selects when we do a select into. So if we do a select into, we can only have one record returned to us. Think about it. If you have more than one record, you can't select it into something. If you have more than one record that's going to be part of your result set, you're going to need to use something called a cursor. Now, again, I'll say that again because that's important. If you're going to have a SQL statement that's going to return more than one row, you're going to need to use a data structure called a cursor, which we're not going to cover in this video. This video, we're just covering singleton selects or SQL statements that are going to return only one record. But we're going to have a problem here because if you remember, I'll give you a hint, we have two people living in the same zip. So let me quickly change this SQL statement to select first name, last name, into v first name, v last name from raw customers where zip equals a zip. And I'll give you a second. If you want to pause the video, you can go right ahead. If not, you can keep typing or just keep watching. So anyway, this looks okay insofar as we should get a good compile, but we'll get a runtime error if we have a scenario where we're going to have more than one record that's returned to us. So let's take a quick look at this. So we're going to pass in the zip code, right? We're going to, on line 8, select first name and last name into v first name, v last name from raw customers where zip equals zip, right? And then we're going to return the first name and the last name. So let's build the store procedure. It's got one error message in here. Success with compilation error. Let's see. So let's see what our error is. So let me just quickly go to edit script. Let me take one look at this. Oh, look, on line 11 is missing a semicolon at minimum. So it never works the first time. So again, we're trying to get a good compile. So on line 11, let's add the semicolon. Let's run this. Do a run now. There we go. Procedure created. Now remember, again, we're not running the store procedure. We're just creating it. So our create works, but we're going to have a runtime error. Again, if we have more than one record, it's going to be returned to us. Because you can't select multiple records into a variable like we're doing. So let's see if we could do that. So with the store procedure created, ready to be called, we're going to make a modification to our script sp get first name. It should be called something else at this point because it's kind of getting the first and the last name. So let's see. Let's make a modification to this script. Run. Okay, there we go. Pardon me. SC run get name. So watch what we're going to do. We got V name. So let's change this to first name. And then we're going to add a line of code for the last name. So we're going to have first name and L name. And rather than ID, we're going to put in zip. So the end game is we're going to put in the zip 60613. 60613 is going to return 2 records, so we should get an error message. So we're going to make that change. I'm just kind of looking over this as I'm typing. So we got first name and last name. That looks about right. So we're going to have to change line 4 for the zip. So we'll say vzip. Vzip is a number. And we're going to change line 6 to zip. And we're going to change 1, not to 1, but how about 60613? So on line 7, rather than VID, we're going to pass in vzip. That looks good. Now, line 8, we're going to have found name. We're going to change that to found first name. And then we're going to add line 9 for found last name as well. So we're still on line 7. We're supplying the arguments for the signature for the store procedure. Remember, vzip is an input argument. VFName is an output argument. And VLName, or VLame, right, is an output argument as well. So I'm just spending some time here making sure that I match as far as my names go. Remember, it's case insensitive, but I'm using good conventions when I can. So let me change that to F name, and we'll do the same for L name and pass it in as well. There we go. Now I need to change line 8 for rather than found name, I'll change this to found first name, and I'll also add line 9 for found last name. So let me make those changes. So found first name equals, and then found last name equals. And then I'm just going to change my parameters on line 8 and 9 for VF name and VL name. Then I should be ready to run this. And like I said, I'm going to get an error message because this store procedure, even though it compiled, it's going to return to me 2 rows. And the rows it's going to return to me, since I'm doing a select into, is going to give me a message saying that SQL statement selected more than one row or multiple rows or something like that. So I think we're good. So let me get rid of that space. Let me do a quick run. Took a little bit longer and I thought it would do that, but I just want to make sure that I get a clean compile. There we go. And I do. But when I run this, look at this. Exact fetch returns more than requested number of rows. And again, that's because we have 2 rows that are returned, not 1. So we need to know about a data type called a cursor, which we're not going to cover in this video. But let's just get this to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the some of the test data just so it returns 1 record rather than 2. So I'm just going to go back to SQL scripts. And again, why am I doing this? Because I want you to see some of these error messages. So we're doing some kind of strange things here, or some non-standard things. How about this? Stuff that you don't see every day. Like, I mean, in real life, you probably wouldn't get to go back and change the data or change the table. But here we are, just so I can show you exactly what error messages you're going to get. So anyway, so I put Cadence in 60184, and I put Bob, or I kept Bob, in 60613. So now, when I run the store procedure, I'm only going to get one row return. So we're going to get, if I put in 60613, I'm going to get Bob. If I put in 60184, I'm going to get Cadence. So we make sure I got my test data, and I do. So now if I run my store procedure, I'm going to click on run. It should run okay. Now again, one of the things I'm trying to emphasize is the difference between compiling store procedures and running them. So here I ran it, and let's do a detail to see what the store procedure returned to us. Remember, we're not going to see the DBMS output print line until we go to detail. And there we go. Found first name equal Bob. Found last name equals Hendry. So it worked. So one thing, again, I want to emphasize is remember that if you have a store procedure that's going to return more than one row, a SQL statement in a store procedure that's going to return more than one row, you can't do what we're doing here. The technique that we're doing here are only working or only will work with what are called singleton selects, which means the SQL statement will only return one row. It's useful for if you want to return a record based on a primary key value. You guys know what a primary key is, right? Because you're only guaranteed to have one record. So for example, state ID IL will return one record, or employee one presumably would be unique. It would it would return one record, or customer ID or what have you. But zip code, like we did right here, we're probably going to get more than one person that's going to be part of that zip code. So the singleton select into probably wouldn't be the best choice that we're going to use. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of get beyond that and get more complex with this. I'm going to point this out that, getting good at store procedure takes a little bit of time. So, your studies for store procedure hopefully are going to be well beyond this video. This video is really just a jumping off point just to get you some quick and dirty store procedures that kind of work. And again, I'm trying to stay away from the purely academic, put in one number, put in two numbers, add them together, or return a third. Something like that we can kind of describe in just a couple of seconds. So I'm kind of starting out with maybe more of the intermediate stuff. So let's build another procedure. Let's forget about the first two that we just wrote and just go on to something else. So I'm going to write a procedure called SP cursor. Now remember I told you that we weren't going to cover cursors in this video. Well, we kind of are, but not in a lot of detail. Cursors are really their own data type and really deserve to be covered in at least one video and probably a series of a couple of them. But a cursor is a data type that we use to hold result sets from a SQL statement. Remember, a result set is the results of a SQL select. So anytime that we run a SQL select, we're going to get a result set. A result set presumably has more than one column and more than one row. Think of it as like an Excel worksheet or workbook where you have your entire result set held somewhere. And that somewhere in Oracle is called a cursor. So we're going to do that. So here we're still going to use the RH customers table, and we're going to have a select first name, last name from RH customers. Now, we don't have a where statement here, just on purpose, because I just want to at least keep it simple. Achievable. So when we declare a cursor in our store procedure, or really anywhere else, we have to open it. So here what we're going to do is we're going to open the cursor. In this case, the cursor is called CNames. And what CNames does is it executes our cursor. Now, I'm doing this with a little bit of trepidation and reservation for the following reason. This store procedure is not going to show you anything. Because open, what it does is it just runs the cursor. So basically, that store procedure is executed, and the result set sits in a cursor called CNames. So why bother? Well, remember, we don't always have to display the, something from our store procedure. We have been, because visually we want to see something, right? But we don't always have to. So, here what happens is this store procedure basically executes this SQL statement, again, select first name, last name from RH customers. It executes it in line 6 in the open statement. So what happens is that store procedure, this store procedure executed the SQL statement and took the result set and put it in this cursor, right? So what do we do with it? Well, we probably want to see it, right? And we don't have to, but here what we can do is if we want to is we can like pass this result set back to maybe a calling program, or what we could do is we could loop through it and do some sort of operation. We could view it. We could do anything we want. So this store procedure here is kind of an intermediate one where you're looking at it saying, well, it's not very useful. Well, it's not useful for us because we don't get to see anything. But, not all store procedures need to show you anything. I mean, here what we're doing is we just have the result set in C names. So what we're going to do is just show you some eye candy. Is we're going to I'm going to modify the store procedure to kind of show you, the first name and the last name. So, I'm going to keep this up on the monitor for a couple seconds here, so you can take a picture of it. And this might be a good chance for you guys to break if you want to actually run this or get it to or see it. Anyway, so let's get back on track here, Bob. So on line 4, I'm going to declare a variable called variable first name, and then we'll say variable last name. And again, this is going to be a variable character too, right? And we're going to add some lines here to kind of see and look inside this cursor a little bit. Why? Just because. So what we'll do is we'll use the fetch keyword. What fetch does is fetch is a command that we use in PL SQL to look or to loop through the cursor. Fetch will actually get to the next row of the cursor. Remember, cursors have rows of data. Row 1, row 2, row 3, or record 1, record 2, record 3. So what this is going to do is going to fetch the first name, the first record, first name and last name, into my cursor. From my cursor. And then it closes it. So anyway, at this point, we could do a couple of things. We can actually write it out to the command line. For example, DBMS output, just to see what it is, or we could pass them back as something else. But right now, if we do a run now, we get an error. So actually, you know what? I didn't expect this one. So let me go to detail, see if we can see a little bit more about this error message. And it doesn't really show us a whole bunch for the error message. It just shows us that there is an error. So let's see. So remember, this is building the store procedure. So we're not getting a good compile. And this was a little bit unexpected. So let's go back and debug this quickly. So I'm going to take a look. It got line 3 looks good. Line 4, like 5. We got open C names. We got fetch. That looks good. So let's fix this. Let's take another quick look at what could be the problem. And to debug this, we do a couple things. First, we'll look at the structure of the as, the begin, and the end, and that looks good. Now we look at the create or replace. That looks good as well. So then we look at the variable declaration for line 4 and 5. That looks good. And then we look at the SQL. Then we look at the fetches. So we got open C names. That line 8 should match the cursor on line 3. And that looks like that's okay. Then we got the fetch, and that looks okay as well. And then we got the close. Oh, look, the close was different than the cursor. We were closing a cursor that didn't exist. So we changed C name to C names, plural, and we should be good to go. So quickly, let's run, which basically does the compile for the store procedure, and we're good to go. But, we're not showing anything. So what gives? Well, remember, we don't have to show anything, but what the fetch does is, I'm just illustrating, the fetch will go to the next record of the store procedure. So if we ran this SP, this store procedure, it should run without an error, and we should get our fetch. But our fetch won't show us anything because we're not asking to see anything. Let me close this. All right, anyway, so we could do a save and we could do a run at this point. I'm just going to slow down a little bit to let you guys take a mental picture of what this looks like. And at this point, it might be a good time for you to pause the video to get a clean compile if you're following along with. If not, you can just keep it going, and we're going to run this store procedure, and then we're going to add a couple more lines here. I'm debating on what we should add to see the values of L name, of VF name and VL name. But you should see when we do run them and see F name and L name, it should just run as advertised. Okay, so anyway, so at this point we can run and take a look at these. Let me think. I'm debating if we should run this or if we should add a line of code. Let me do that. Because if I ran this at this point, we're not going to see anything. It's just going to say store procedure ran successfully. So let's put some maybe debugging stops or just some DBMS output just to kind of show where we're at with this. So I'm going to put in SP is running. And then after we do the fetch, we can just do the values of F name and L name if we want, or we can run it now. Again, if you're doing this on your own, I encourage you to try it a variety of different ways, not just what I'm doing. But now that we got the fetch, let's quickly put in the DBMS output and show the values of the F name and L name. So if we run this store procedure, an imaginary extra credit bonus point, how many records is this cursor going to have in it? Well, it's going to have 2. How do you know? Because we built the test data. We're going to have 2 records in there. We have Bob Hendry and Cadence Hendry. So what we're doing now is we're modifying a store procedure to loop through all the records in our cursor. Remember, in the first half of this video, we're running a singleton select with the select into. Now with the cursor, we have everything, but we have to kind of loop through it to see it. So that's what I'm doing right here. Is on line 12, I'm doing a loop. I'm going to put in a DBMS output put line, first name and last name, and then another fetch. Remember, fetch gets the next record. So the initial fetch is on line 10, and then we have on line 14, we have the fetch, which is going to be within the loop. So this fetch is going to execute on line 14 as long as we have more rows. So on line 15, I'm just going to do a quick end loop, and we should be good to go. So let me put a semicolon there. Let me eyeball this really quick. And this is a more complete store procedure. We didn't run it when it was incomplete because it would have ran. It just wouldn't have showed us anything. So here we're just going to at least visually see the records that we have. So I'll let you guys take a look at this. When complete, you can do a save and a run. So let's do a run now. And you should see procedure created. Now remember, just because it's created doesn't mean you're running it. So we're going to run it now. We're going to go back to that PL SQL block of code, and we're going to change it to run SP cursor. Now, just for the sake of argument, notice the SP cursor, or cursor 1, we have here on line 1. We don't have any parameters. We're not passing anything into it, but we could if we wanted. Just like in the previous examples with the singleton select, we could, but here we're being pretty generic and pretty simple by not passing in a parameter. Now remember, store procedure can get complicated. We're already getting complicated. We're probably getting right to the end of this video. We only have a few minutes left because we're covered quite a bit. So let me go into SQL commands. And at this point, what we can do is we can just execute that store procedure from the command line. We could run it in a script like we did before, but here we're not going to. We're just going to run an execute. Now, it's a coincidence that we're doing an execute on the store procedure that has the cursor. That's just a coincidence because we could use the command line like we have here on any store procedure. I'm just showing you, a different way that we can do it. Because in the singleton select, we did the script. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to do it as part of just SQL plus. Do it. Execute wouldn't work. Exec wouldn't work. We're going to have to put this in a block like we did before. If you did this from older versions of SQL plus, this probably would work. And you see me, again, sometimes using some of the old syntax like I am here because I'm an old SQL plus guy to see if the syntax still works and just to see that it doesn't. So this execute's not going to work here. So we can't use the short exec or the execute, or we just can't specify the store procedure itself. And this is how you would actually call it from another store procedure. So even though that we're doing this from the SQL command line, we're still going to have to put in a declare. So let me actually let's do the begin, not the declare. My fault. So let's do begin. And we're just going to put in an anonymous block for a begin and an end. So let me call my store procedure. Again, it's called SP-cursor1. And we're not passing in any parameters. So there's going to be nothing that we're passing in or out. And then let me do a quick end. And I believe on line 2, let me think if I'm okay or not. I think I'm fine. I have a begin and an end, and I'm calling SP-cursor1. And since I'm not passing any parameters in or out of it, we should be good to go. So let me do a quick run. And, pardon me. So we got an error message here that we found the end. So let me think what the error is here. Yeah, it doesn't like it. So we got SP-cursor1. We got the begin and the end. And since we're not passing any parameters into it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in just a semicolon, and we should be good to go. Perfect. So notice we got SP is running, Bob Hendry, Cadence Hendry. Now notice we don't got to do like the output of the script because there is no script here. I mean, basically what we're doing is we're just running the store procedure from the command line, from the SQL commands. So we get SP is running, and we got Bob Hendry and Cadence Hendry. So perfect. Now, let's review what we did here. We went over an intro to store procedures. We created some test data. I showed you some error messages that you'd get, like if the columns didn't match. And then we just kind of went back and fixed our data. In real life, we probably wouldn't do that, but at least you got to see the error message. And then from there, we went into simple singleton select store procedures, where singleton selects only return one row. And then we went into simple cursor store procedures. And a cursor is when you have a SQL statement that returns more than one row. And then what we did is we just looped through the cursor just to show you that was in there. So that concludes our video on introduction to store procedures. Hope you'll learn something. And from here, what you would do is you would go into more cursors and more advanced store procedures. So thanks for listening.